Mulugeta Seraw was an Ethiopian business student who was murdered by three white supremacists in Portland, Oregon on November 13, 1988. Kenneth Death Minsky, Kyle Brewster, and Steve Strausser, whom belonged to a local racial skinhead gang called East Side White Pride, or ESWB, and another racist organization called White Aryan Resistance, or WAR. The three men, with their girlfriends, were on their way home when they encountered Seraw. Seraw had just been dropped off at his apartment when he was confronted by Minsky, Strausser, and Brewer. The men then began to beat Seraw with a baseball bat until he lay unconscious in a pool of his own blood as the group drove off. Seraw then died the next day. The brutal murder galvanized the city of Portland, Oregon. In 1990, a massive anti-racism protest was held in the city, which was met by a counter-protest of neo-Nazi skinheads and other racist groups. Despite Portland, Oregon being an overwhelmingly white city, the city had thought that they had been an open and tolerant society. This is the story of the murder of Mulugeta Seraw. Born on October 21st of 1960, Mulugeta Seraw was born and raised in the African country of Ethiopia near the capital Addis Ababa. His father, Enoch Seraw, was a livestock salesman who sold livestock to make a living. During the 1960s and 70s, Ethiopia was experiencing political instability. In 1974, Ethiopia's long-standing emperor, Emperor Haile Selassie, who had ruled since 1930, was overthrown by a communist coup known as the Drag. Selassie was ultimately assassinated a year later in 1975. Following this, the Derg then launched more than a decade of civil war in the country. To escape the violence and for a better life, Enoch decided to send his son to the United States, and Mulugeta decided to move to Portland, Oregon to take a business and social work degree. This was at Portland State University. Seraw worked as a bus driver and a janitor to make ends meet. He stayed in an apartment and was well known and liked by the burgeoning Ethiopian community in the area. In the early morning hours of November 13th, 1988, Seraw and his friends arrived at his apartment. Further down Southeast Pine Street, a group of white supremacists and their girlfriends piled into a car and headed towards Seraw's location. Unbeknownst to Seraw, his car was blocking the southeast street of 35th Street. The neo-Nazis in their car began to shout and yell at Seraw and his friends. Once they noticed the occupants in the car were black, racial slurs and epithets were then said. In an attempt to mediate the situation, Seraw got out of his car to confront the gang. Mulugeta was then attacked by the neo-Nazis. Some bludgeoned him with a baseball bat while others kicked him with their steel-toed boots. Seraw then lay in a pool in his own blood, bleeding profusely from his wounds. He later died at the hospital the next day. Mulugeta Seraw was only 28 years old when he died. The murder of Mulugeta Seraw shocked the community. Despite the city claiming to be tolerant and open to outsiders, the city was overwhelmingly white and was unaware of a growing and underground presence of its white supremacist and neo-Nazi community. Portland had had a history of racism starting back to the city's founding. In 1859, the city legislature had purposely excluded African Americans from its population. In the 1980s, neo-Nazis openly protested in the city's streets. Morris Dees, an attorney for the Southern Poverty Law Center, or SPLC, brought a lawsuit against Eastside White Pride and the other racist organization called WAR, or White Aryan Resistance, for the murder of Mulugeta Seraw. The head of WAR was a man named Tom Metzger, an avowed racist. The SPLC and the Anti-Defamation League, or ADL, sued Metzger for $12.5 million, although Metzger could not make all the payments for the amount. All three men were held accountable for their actions. Kenneth, or Ken Death Minsky, was sentenced to life imprisonment. He died of hepatitis C in 2011 at the age of 45. He never had any remorse for his crimes. Kyle Brewster was sentenced to 20 years in prison. He was released in 2002, and he has had in and out stints in prison. He is still active in the right-wing and far-right movement. Stephen Strausser was released in 1999. Unlike Brewster and Minsky, Strausser left the white power movement. The murder of Seraw was considered a touchstone for racial tolerance in Portland. His death is commemorated annually in the city, and Portland has become an epicenter of frequent and often violent demonstrations against racism and far-right movements.